Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be looking at this concept of imperial privilege.
Okay.
And to get us started, I actually wanted to just read this quote from the material that we were looking at.
Yeah.
And it says, the ability of the American electorate to shrug off the plight of those who suffer as the direct result of U.S. foreign policy is so pervasive that it deserves a name. We call it imperial privilege. Pretty striking, right?
Yeah, and it really does kind of hit you right between the eyes in a way.
Yeah.
Like, are we even as, politically aware as we think we are?
Right. Are we missing something?
Yeah.
So maybe the best place to start is just like, what is this idea?
Sure.
What is imperial privilege and how does it play out?
Well, at its core, I think it's really about this ability that we have as Americans to kind of disconnect from what's going on globally as a result of U.S. foreign policy.
Okay.
We can turn off the news.
Yeah.
We can go about our day. We can, largely avoid the realities of war and intervention that are happening in other places.
Look, we have a choice.
Right, exactly.
Let people go.
Other people don't.
Yeah.
If you're living in Yemen,
Right.
you're living in Gaza,
Yeah.
war is not something that you can just turn off.
Right.
It's a constant reality.
Yeah.
And U.S. actions have a role in that.
It's almost like the source was describing it as like, we have this remote control.
Yeah.
We can just turn it off.
Exactly.
And other people are stuck living in the broadcast.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's so interesting, too, is that this doesn't fall neatly into,
Right.
like Democrat versus Republican,
Right.
liberal versus conservative.
Right.
This can impact anybody.
Yeah.
And I think especially when we're talking about liberal politics and voters who consider themselves very progressive,
Yeah.
this is something that we really need to examine.
Yeah. And it made me think about the 2016 elections, which the source material actually talks about.
It does.
And how even people who were very much, behind Black Lives Matter domestically, maybe weren't thinking as much about foreign policy implications.
Right. And that's one of the arguments that the authors are making is that there was this disconnect between, advocating for social justice at home and then considering what U.S. foreign policy was actually doing around the world.
Even though it's impacting people of color.
Exactly. Even though it's having a very real and often devastating impact on, people of color in other parts of the world.
Yeah. And they even made the point that, maybe even saying, I'm not going to vote for Hillary Clinton because of her foreign policy record could be a form of this privilege itself.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, like my domestic concerns are more important.
Right. Well, and that's a really tough question.
Yeah.
Can we claim the moral high ground if we're, advocating for these things here, but then kind of turning a blind eye to
what's happening as a result over there?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a tough thing to grapple with.
Yeah, so this idea of killable populations, which the article brings up, is also really disturbing.
Yeah.
This idea that, because of our imperial privilege, we're almost dehumanizing people outside the U.S.
It's easier.
And it makes it easier to support these policies.
Right, because they're not.
Yeah.
They're not people.
They're not us.
Right. And what's really interesting, too, is the authors point out that this isn't just about race.
Okay.
Right? Like, this isn't white Americans dehumanizing, people of color in other countries.
Got it.
This is really about a power dynamic.
Okay.
It's about Americans as a whole and our role in this global system.
So Americans of any race could be participating.
Exactly. And I think that's what's so uncomfortable about this, right? Because we all like to think of ourselves as the good guys. Right.
But, are we really?
Well, they had this really striking example where they were like, would we be okay arming Denmark to bomb Norway?
Right.
Probably not. But arming Saudi Arabia to bomb Yemen?
Right. Yeah.
Somehow that's different.
And it's devastating.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about a humanitarian crisis.
Right. But it's just not on our radar.
Right. And I think that's where this imperial privilege comes in.
Okay.
It allows us to distance ourselves from the impact of our actions.
Yeah.
Especially when those actions are affecting people and places that we've already kind of otherized in our minds.
So let's bring it back to American politics, because the episode description actually said something about how, the Democratic Party is spiraling the drain when it comes to, integrity and the moral high ground.
Right.
So how does imperial privilege fit into that?
Well, that's where things get really interesting, because the authors are suggesting that it might actually be contributing to that decline.
They're saying by focusing so much on domestic issues and not adequately addressing the consequences of their foreign policy choices, the Democratic Party is creating this gap between their actions and their values.
So they're kind of undermining their claim to the moral high ground.
Exactly.
When they're saying, like, you know, Black Lives Matter here, but then also supporting policies that are harming people of color abroad.
Exactly. It's like this double standard.
Yeah.
And that's where understanding imperial privilege becomes so important. Because it helps explain how these inconsistencies can exist.
Got it.
Even among well-intentioned individuals.
Yeah.
It's not just about, you know, individual choices or party platforms. It's really about this larger systemic issue.
That's baked into everything.
Exactly. It shapes our entire political discourse.
It's like we're all participating in it without even realizing it.
Right. And that's why the authors emphasize this importance of awareness, like recognizing that imperial privilege exists and how it shapes our perceptions is absolutely crucial.
So we can start having honest conversations.
Right.
Yeah, so like shining a light on those blind spots.
Exactly, making the invisible visible.
Yeah. So do you think that this awareness could actually change things?
I think it has to.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to start asking tougher questions.
Like what?
Not just about domestic policy, but about, you know, the true cost of our military interventions. The ethical implications of our alliances, the long-term consequences of our actions on people around the world.
Like being more critical of the narratives we're being fed?
Absolutely. We need to be willing to challenge those narratives and demand more transparency from our leaders.
And not just the politicians, but like even us.
Yes, exactly. It's about taking responsibility for our own biases.
Our own blind spots.
Yeah.
So it's not enough to just be aware of it. No. We have to actively work to dismantle it.
Right.
But how?
Well, it starts with education. Learning about the history of U.S. foreign policy. Understanding its impact on different communities around the world. Engaging in thoughtful dialogue with others.
Even people we disagree with.
Especially people we disagree with. You know, having those difficult conversations.
Even with people we agree with politically.
Exactly. We need to be willing to challenge our own assumptions.
Our own biases.
Even if it makes us uncomfortable.
You know, it's like...
and that discomfort is a sign of growth. It means we're starting to see the world through a wider lens.
This has given me a lot to think about.
Good.
I mean, it's challenging me to confront some pretty uncomfortable truths. About our political system and our role in the world.
But I think there's hope.
You
know what's so powerful about this concept of imperial privilege is that it doesn't just highlight a problem. It also points toward a solution.
What is it?
By becoming aware of our own biases. And engaging in more critical thinking about U.S. foreign policy, we can start to dismantle this system and create a more just and equitable world.
That's a big call to action.
It is.
It's like saying we all have to do something.
It's about recognizing that true social justice can't be achieved in isolation. It requires us to expand our circle of concern. See the interconnectedness of our lives. And act in solidarity with those who are most impacted by our decisions.
Both at home and abroad.
Exactly.
That idea of interconnectedness is powerful.
It is.
Like our actions, no matter how small, have these ripple effects.
Exactly. And the choices we make, even those that seem unrelated to foreign policy, can contribute to or challenge this system.
So what does that look like?
In practice.
What can we do? It feels kind of overwhelming, right?
It is.
Like, what can I do as one person?
But I think what the authors are trying to say is that awareness of this is already a huge step. Like, it's about acknowledging these questions of conscience that have been kind of silenced and bringing those back into our political discussions.
So not just accepting the way things are.
Right. We need to be actively questioning those narratives.
Asking those tough questions.
Yes.
Like what?
Why are we intervening in this conflict? Who benefits from this alliance? What are the long-term consequences of these actions? Particularly for the people who live in these regions.
Are we getting the full story?
Exactly. And that requires us to have those uncomfortable conversations.
Even with people we agree with.
Especially with people we agree with.
Because this can be happening in like progressive circles too.
Absolutely. Imperial privilege doesn't discriminate.
We all have blind spots.
We all have blind spots, and it's about being willing to challenge each other.
Yeah, like comfort the afflicted and
Yeah,
afflict the comfortable.
exactly. Sometimes we need to push ourselves and those around us to think more critically
I like that.
about the world and our role in it.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a really eye-opening deep dive for me.
Good.
I'm definitely going to be looking at things a little bit differently now,
I hope so.
and thinking about, you know, how I can be more engaged,
That's great.
both here and in the wider world.
Yeah, I think that's the whole point of these conversations,
Yeah.
is to challenge our perspectives,
Yeah.
deepen our understanding,
Wow.
and empower us to engage with the world in a more informed
Yeah.
and compassionate way.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
I hope so.
So for everyone listening, I want to leave you with this.
Yeah.
Now that you are aware of imperial privilege, how might it change your own political conversations and choices?
That's a good question.
What blind spots or biases do you need to confront? And how can you use this knowledge to become a more thoughtful and engaged citizen?
It's a great question for all of us to consider.
I hope you keep thinking about this long after the episode is over.
Me too.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.